Hi, how are you? My name's Frank Sasek. I was born and raised right here in Astoria, Queens. Um, I grew up with an alcoholic father who was a police officer for more than 20 years, and a mother who worked in a local diner right here for 20 years. And because of my father's excessive drinking, he was never home, so my mother was forced to be out and working to try to keep the family together. I grew up with four siblings. Um, while growing up, they were searching for their own identities. So I chose to go to the streets to try to find the love that I was seeking. Um, by my mid-teens, around 17, 18, I got into drug dealing, robberies, carrying weapons, going out and hurting people. It was just, my life was just mass hysteria. Well, as I moved into my older ages, the more I moved into my older ages, the more harder my crimes got. And I found myself thriving on people having fear of me. That was like my new addiction. So I was out there and doing bigger crimes, carrying guns, doing armed robbery, just madness after madness. And I was just always felt God in my life, though, speaking out to me, but I always ignored it. I just kept soldiering on for Satan, doing the things that I felt that I wanted to do. And I had those worldly wants, the money, the power, the fame, the street cred. And I thought that that's what life was about. Well, as I moved into my later 20s, I met the woman that would eventually become my wife. And I fell in love with her, and I just had this addiction towards her. And she became my new addiction. And we would go out if we were in a bar or in a club, and a guy said something to her. You know, I'd pick up a weapon, I'd bash him in the head. I would do such violent acts because I thrived off of violence. It was what I wanted to do. It's what made me feel complete. I knew I was lashing out with all these acts that I was doing. Finally, I felt my marriage just falling apart, totally disintegrating. Me and my wife grew apart. We grew further and further apart to the point where we decided the best bet was to get a divorce. So I got divorced in about 2004 and decided to move out to Florida to change my life. I just couldn't be in New York knowing that she was here because my addiction for her was just so crazy, and I couldn't deal with it. So I decided to move out to Florida. And I was living in Orlando with my sister, and things were nice out there. And all of a sudden, I got a call from a friend of mine who moved out to Tampa, Florida. And he invited me to go out and live with him. So I decided to pack my bags up and move out to Tampa, Florida. While I was in Tampa, I was working in all the club scene out there, bouncing, doing this. And while I was there working in one of the clubs, I met a guy who offered me a job in his business, which he owned a travel agency, but he had a printing division that would print up all their booklets and their flyers. And while there, I started working for him, and I met a beautiful young lady there who was a lot younger than me, who had an attraction to me, and it felt good to finally have, a young woman. It was like the trophy, having this young woman attracted to you. And we started dating, and eventually I moved her into my house. After moving her in, I finally realized that she had a lot of dark baggage in her life. An ex-boyfriend being one of them. This guy was addicted to her the way I was addicted to my ex-wife. So I knew what he felt. I knew the potential that this guy had. He started calling me up and making death threats, telling me he was going to come to my house and kill me. He had guns and all this stuff. And, me being the person I talked back to him and told him, well, listen, you come on to see me then. I have guns too. You better really have one. Well, a few months later, he showed up at my house. There was a knock on my door that was about to change my life forever. And there was a knock on my door, and when I opened the door, he swung on me, and we got into a physical altercation. Well, he stepped back out of my apartment, and he reached behind his back and told me he had a gun. I thought he was going to produce a handgun, so I reached into my waistband, and I pulled out a handgun. Chased him through the parking lot of my apartment complex. He jumped in a car and took off, and the cops came, and they locked me up and took me to Pinellas County Jail, where I sat for 2 years waiting to go to trial. While I was in Pinellas County Jail for 2 years, I accepted Christ into my life. I felt the Lord say to me, you've done everything in your life, and you wanted to become a murderer on top of that. This is what you've become. And I was just so into reaching out to the Lord. And I met with a pastor named Ken Boaz, who was the lead pastor at the Church of Clearwater. And he would come in, he would do Bible studies with us and hold services. And he asked me one day if I wanted to accept Christ into my life. And I knew it was the right time. I knew the Lord was tugging at me my whole life. So I decided to accept Christ into my life. I was later sentenced to prison, to go to prison for 3 more years. I went up to Santa Rosa Prison, which is in Milton, Florida. And while I was there, my first night, I was put into my cell. And I asked the guard if I could get a Bible while I was there. And he told me that the only way I could get a Bible was after 30 days I would have to prove myself. So while sitting there in my room by myself in a 6x9, I sat there and I looked up on a shelf and I noticed that there was a Bible sitting on the shelf from whoever was there before me. And I picked it up and just asked God to show me while I was there what I was there for, what my real purpose was, because I knew it wasn't only for my crime. And I opened up the Bible. I didn't look for any specific scripture, just opened it up. And this is what the scripture was that was there. It said, I, as a prisoner for the Lord, then urge you to live a life worthy of your calling that you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God, Father of all, who is over all, and through all and in all. But to each one of us grace has been given, as Christ has appointed it. This is why it says, when he ascended the high, he took many captives and gives gifts to his people. And at that point I knew that I wasn't a prisoner because of my crime. I was now a prisoner for the Lord. Thank you very much.